So the slogan, Defund the Police, heard from protesters and progressive Democrats in the aftermath of George Floyd's death. But former President Barack Obama is warning about it.
If you believe, as I do, that we should be able to reform the criminal justice system so that it's not biased and treats everybody fairly, I guess you can use a snappy slogan like defund the police, but you know you've lost a big audience the minute you say it, which makes it a lot less likely that you're actually going to get the changes you want done.
So let's discuss now CNN political commentators Angela Rye and Karen Finney. Hello, hello. Here we go. I think this is conversation we've had like on the phone, over text. So Angela, is Barack Obama right? Is defund the police a slogan that turns voters away?
I don't care. I think it's a conversation that needs to be had. And what I would say is, I think the moment that we begin to ask politicians to account for and to opine on rhetoric of the activist community is the moment that we walk into real trouble. Nobody consulted Lyndon B. Johnson on whether or not what Dr. King was saying was appropriate, or if it would work, or whether or not it would turn off Democratic voters. I think the real question we need to be asking is something else that was talked about in that interview, and it is why we haven't made space for younger voices who know how to appeal to the very audiences who were out all summer long with the George Floyd. What we have to wrestle with in the Democratic Party is whether or not incrementalism has served us and whether or not that's resulted in the saving of more Black lives, and I would argue it has not.
I think that is a very good argument about incrementalism, but when you have something like defund the police, Angela, it's not a winning strategy. I know you said you don't care, but as an activist, shouldn't you care? Because that slogan lost seats. It lost Democrats.
Oh, it actually didn't.
Well, I know that's a talking point where that progressives like to say, well.
Oh, I'm not espousing a talking point. I'm actually relying on data.
No,
But
I know you're going to talk about the data. Go on, but I think that the data
I agree with her on that one.
The data that you're talking about is something that I know that progressives like to hold on to and say it's a data. But the overall election, it's a small number of people, progressives who ran on very progressive parts of the Democratic ticket, held their seats. But for the most part, Democrats who ran on defund the police and
who
they called socialism, they lost. Democrats lost across the board. The only Democrats that won was Biden.
That's actually not true, right? First of all, and Karen, I'll let you hop in here, but let me just clarify a couple of things. One, and I hope I don't get in trouble for saying this, but let me first say this. This is not a Democratic talking point, right? What I'm referencing is the CBC PAC, in concert with the DCCC, actually held a poll and talked about not just defund the police, but around police reform period for the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. And what you saw is that people were very interested in those reforms. My point is that we should not be in the business of trying to shift what an activist message frame is to get people to the streets to ensure real change in communities. In fact, if you look at what happened in communities where policing budgets actually take place on the local and state level, there actually were several police budgets that were shifted. There actually were several conversations and city council votes that were held.
But so Angela, I think that's not what people hear.
So wait,
but
guys,
that's not what people hear when they hear defund the police.
Don.
They don't hear shift
But
police.
that's not my responsibility, Don.
This is
somebody's responsibility to keep a George Floyd alive.
But okay, listen, I understand that. But as an activist, and you said, who did you say the DCCC did that? That's a political.
I did that poll, guys.
But that's a political. I'm gonna let you get in. But that's a political organization. Isn't it all about?
No, I did it with him.
But
Angela.
isn't it all about winning seats and winning people over so that you can have some power? Because you can't do any of that. You can't, if you indeed want to defund the police, you cannot do it if you're not in power. If you don't have someone in that position to help you do what you want to do. Go on, Karen.
So 3 things I'm going to say here. First of all, Cornell and Belcher and I did do that poll together. Angela, I wasn't saying you weren't saying that we did it together. We did that together, and we talked to suburban white women. We talked to some suburban white women outside of Chicago not long after some of the violence that had erupted there. And what we found is when you talk about the language of what is in the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, people very much agree with it. They agree with the idea of accountability for in policing. But but I think there's a larger issue, and there's a couple pieces. The activist in me and the Black woman in me that has herself been profiled, cuffed, and ended up in a jail cell because of a fine for a ticket knows we need reform, 100%. And I get the language that activists are trying to use to push us forward. I don't disagree as a communications expert with President Obama that what can happen is people may not listen to the second sentence after Defund the Police about the vision that we're talking about when we talk about the changes that are needed, not just to our policing and criminal justice systems, but in how we reimagine what actual safe communities for Black people and white people and brown people and all Americans really looks like. And that's part of why when people went to go testify on Capitol Hill, we don't just talk about, you know, the policing side. We have to talk about, you know, having, you know, diversion programs and mental health and safe places for our kids to play. So it's a whole range of conversation that we have to have. I think personally, we need both. We need the activists who push us forward. We need the policy though. And I do think we need to be able to explain and talk about our policy in ways that we bring people into the conversation with us. And one of the most important findings that we talked about in that poll is if you are a white American and you do not live with the threat of racism in your daily life, it is a more abstract concept. So when we talk about some of these reforms that are needed, when you saw the video of George Floyd, you got it right away. There's a problem. That doesn't happen every day. So how we engage in these conversations matters. The last thing I will say, it is absolute nonsense to say that people lost their seats over socialism and defund the police. That is a much bigger problem about people, as Angela was saying, the data showing those were gerrymandered GOP-leaning districts that we barely won in the first place, and two, a Democratic Party that needs to do a better job showing up everywhere, standing up for our values, and defining ourselves, and not letting the Republicans define us in a lot of those places.
Listen, I'm just saying, we're going to take a break and then we're going to come back because I'm going to continue this conversation. I think it's got to be a longer conversation. All I'm saying is you don't give your, why would you give the people who oppose you ammo? And why would you turn people off by a slogan that doesn't work? You can change the slogan and do the same work, but let's talk about it. Angela, you'll get the first word on the other side of the break. We'll be right back.